The first thing Von Rowe noticed was the silence. Not the polished hush of money-soft carpet, muted voices, the careful distance people keep from strangers' pain. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that makes a man hear his own heartbeat and wonder if it's giving him away. Conference Room 7 sat on the third floor of Georgetown Private Wealth, all glass and warm wood, staged like a living room that happened to come with documents that could ruin you. Vaughn adjusted his cufflink, smoothed the lapel of his black suit, and settled into the face he'd been wearing for 3 days, eyes slightly red, mouth set in the grief of a devoted husband. He had rehearsed it until it looked natural. On the drive over, he'd even practiced his sighs at red lights, the little tremor in his voice when he said her name. He pictured the will in the safe, the signature that made him the only heir, and the way the banker's condolences had sounded like applause. Amina's empire, her facilities, her real estate, her investments, was supposed to slide into his hands like silk. All he had to do was keep acting, just a little. A receptionist had led him down the hallway without asking questions. Everybody knew his name now. Everybody had heard. Dr. Amina Rowe found in the woods. Tragic. Stunning. A woman with a bright empire, gone like a light switched off. Vaughn liked the way people lowered their voices around him. It felt like power returning in small pieces. He pushed the door open. For a split second, his brain refused to translate what his eyes were seeing. The long mahogany table. The skyline beyond the windows. And at the far end of the room, Amina. Alive. Not the Amina from glossy photos. This Amina was thinner, paler, a soft scarf at her throat like she'd been recovering from something that tried to erase her. But her posture was unmistakable, straight spine, shoulders squared, hands folded, as if she'd been waiting for a board meeting. Her eyes found his and didn't blink. Vaughn's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lungs forgot how to work. Beside her sat a man Vaughn didn't recognize at first, early 40s. Calm eyes, the stillness of someone who doesn't waste motion. Near the window stood a woman in a sharp suit with a badge in her hand. 2 uniformed officers were posted by the door behind Vaughn, and suddenly he understood why the hallway had been so quiet. This wasn't a meeting. This was a trap. You! Vaughn heard his own voice, thin and cracked. You're supposed to be dead. Amina's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. Recognition without mercy. The woman with the badge stepped forward. Von Rowe? Her tone was professional, precise. Investigator Renee Carver, District Attorney's Office. You are being detained in connection with an attempted homicide. Detained, attempted, homicide. The words hit Vaughn like ice water. His knees softened. He grabbed the back of a chair as if leather and wood could hold up his whole world. No, he said quickly. This is a misunderstanding. He swallowed. I've been grieving. Save it, Carver said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You'll speak when it's time. It's another process. Amina stood. The room seemed to tilt toward her, as if the air itself obeyed. Vaughn forced his face into the expression that had always worked on her hurt, confusion, sincerity. Amina, baby. Don't, she said. One word. Soft, final. Vaughn stopped like he'd been slapped. Amina slid a folder across the table toward him. The movement was graceful, almost casual, like she was passing him a menu. Divorce petition, she said. Filed, signed, you get nothing. Vaughn stared at the folder as if it might explode. The letters blurred. He tried to reach for it, but his fingers felt numb. You can't do this, he whispered. Amina's gaze sharpened. You already tried? Carver nodded once. Officers. The 2 officers stepped closer, boots quiet on the carpet. Vaughn backed up a half step and hit the door behind him. There was nowhere to go. His mind scrambled for a script. Deny, cry, accuse, collapse. None of it fit the way the room was arranged. None of it fit the way Amina was looking at him. Because she wasn't looking like a woman who had been betrayed. She was looking like a woman who had survived. And in that moment, Vaughn understood something that made his throat go dry. Somehow, she knew everything. The debts, the lies, the girl, the promises he'd whispered when he thought the dark would protect him. He felt his carefully built life, his double life, start to peel away like cheap wallpaper. Amina didn't move. She didn't tremble. She didn't plead. The woman he had left for dead was standing in front of him like a judge. Vaughn wanted to hate her for it. Instead, fear spread through him, slow and absolute, because fear was the only honest thing he had left. And before the handcuffs could click, before Vaughn could hear his own name turned into a case number, the story yanked backward like a camera pulled out of a room too late to stop what happened. 72 hours earlier, Amina Rowe had been standing in her own kitchen, staring at a glass of water like it held an answer she didn't want. The Potomac glimmered outside the windows of their penthouse. The apartment smelled faintly of jasmine from the diffuser by the sink. Everything was elegant, controlled, exactly the kind of home people imagined when they saw her name on donor lists and leadership panels. And yet, something in the air felt wrong. It had started as a small thing, Vaughn's sudden sweetness. The way he touched her arm when he passed, like he was reminding himself she was real. The way he'd started saying baby again, after months of barely looking up from his phone. Amina told herself it was guilt over being busy. She told herself they were finding their way back. But her body didn't believe her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A calendar notification. Dinner, National Harbor, 8 p.m. Vaughn had put it there with a grin, like a man proud of planning something romantic. Anniversary dinner, he'd said. Just us. Like we used to. Amina had smiled. She even felt a soft warmth bloom in her chest. She missed the early days, before the gala circuits and investor calls, before her business grew so large it required her to become steel. Then Vaughn walked away, and the second phone, the one he claimed was for work, lit up on the side table. A message preview flashed for half a second before it disappeared. Can't wait. When's it happening? Amina hadn't meant to see it. She hadn't been snooping. It was just there, bright against the dark screen, like a confession that slipped through a crack. She stood still, holding the glass. Her fingers tightened, not enough to spill, but enough to feel the pulse in her own hand. When Vaughn returned, he was humming, moving around the kitchen with a tenderness that felt rehearsed. "You okay?" he asked. Amina looked at him. Really looked. His smile sat a little too perfectly on his face. His eyes didn't match it. "I'm fine," she said. And that was the moment she admitted the truth she'd been dodging for months. She wasn't scared because she didn't trust him. She was scared because she finally did. She set the glass down carefully, like she was placing something fragile back on a shelf. 8 o'clock, she repeated, more to herself than to him. Vaughn leaned in and kissed her cheek. 8 o'clock. Waterfront, you'll love it. His lips were warm, his voice was soft, but the chill that ran through Amina's spine felt older than the marriage. It felt like instinct. And if you've ever had a moment where your life looked normal on the outside, but something deep inside you whispered, run, then you know exactly what she felt. So don't go anywhere, because the dinner Vaughn planned didn't lead to romance. It led to a gravel road, a dark tree line, and a truth sharp enough to cut clean through 7 years of lies. And if you're still with me right now, tap the like button so this story reaches more people who need to hear it. Then drop a comment and tell me what time it is, where you're listening from, and what city you're in. Trust me, you'll want to remember where you were when the next part hits. Amina Rowe built her life the way some people build cathedrals, one quiet brick at a time, with patience, with faith, and with a refusal to beg for permission. She was 40, a doctor by training, and an operator by instinct, and in the D.C. corridor where power wore polite smiles, her name carried weight. She owned a boutique network of luxury memory care and assisted living residences built for Black professionals who wanted dignity, privacy, and beauty as they aged. Her empire wasn't built on sparkle. It was built on detail and the discipline to protect it. Vaughn Rowe liked to stand in the sparkle anyway. At fundraisers, he wore tuxedos like they were born on him. He leaned close when Amina spoke, nodded at the right moments, and told people, "That's my wife," in a voice that made strangers smile. Vaughn knew how to make stillness look like strength. Amina used to think it was love. 7 years earlier, Vaughn had found her at a community health fair when she was exhausted and her hands smelled like sanitizer. He approached with easy confidence, listened carefully, and asked about her dream of building care spaces that felt like home instead of punishment. He didn't seem threatened by her ambition. He made her feel seen. And to a woman who spent her days carrying other people's fears, that kind of attention felt like rest. What Amina didn't know, what she learned later in small bruising flashes, was that Vaughn had always been reading her like a map. His own dreams had crashed before she ever entered the picture. He talked about a tech venture that failed, about investors who promised and vanished, about bad timing and worse luck. He never gave clean details, only emotion. And Amina, generous by nature, believed pain meant honesty. She didn't interrogate. She thought love was what you did when someone was trying to stand back up. So she helped. She introduced him to people. She let him use her office when he said he needed space to work. She covered a debt he called temporary. Vaughn thanked her like she was a miracle and kissed her forehead as if she'd saved him. When they married, Amina's attorney insisted on an ironclad prenup. Vaughn signed it with a laugh and a kiss. "Baby, I'm not here for your money," he said. "I'm here for you." The ink dried, the rules locked. Everything Amina owned stayed hers. Vaughn's smile never changed. But the marriage did. It didn't explode. It thinned. Vaughn stopped asking about her day and started disappearing into his home office at odd hours. He claimed it was consulting, networking, building something. He started carrying 2 phones. When Amina teased him about it, he said, "One is for clients, one is for friends. Don't worry about it." He was careful to sound amused, like her question was sweet. Amina didn't want to be a wife who policed a grown man. She had residents to protect, employees to manage, investors to reassure. She told herself marriage had seasons. She told herself they would circle back. Vaughn played his role well enough. Flowers on hard weeks, anniversary photos online, a perfect escort at charity dinners, holding her chair, smiling for cameras. People whispered, "Lucky." Amina absorbed the whisper because it was easier than admitting she often ate dinner alone. Then the money started to rot. Amina felt it in her body first. A quiet warning, like a smoke alarm with no sound. It began as small signs she didn't connect. A late notice on a credit card she didn't recognize. An unknown number Vaughn silenced too quickly. A package delivered to the concierge with a name he called a shipping mistake. When Amina asked, he blamed the banks. "I'll handle it," he said. And he said it the way men say things when they want the topic buried. The truth was uglier. Vaughn had been betting. At first, he called it entertainment, a little thrill. Then it became an itch. He placed money on games and outcomes that felt predictable until they weren't. A few wins made him cocky. Losses made him reckless. Reckless became routine. Collectors didn't knock politely. They hunted. So Vaughn built compartments. A card not linked to the household accounts, a burner phone tucked in his glove box, an email Amina never saw. He delivered lies with steady confidence. Baltimore, Richmond, potential investor watching her face for suspicion. Most nights, Amina was too tired to question him. And into that tiredness, Nia Bell stepped in. Nia was 22, working at a designer boutique in Tyson's Corner, dreaming of a small cafe with Afro-chic decor and vintage records. She wanted freedom. She had the kind of hope that made promises sound like plans. Vaughn met her while shopping for an anniversary gift, and Nia smiled at him like he was the first man in months who noticed her. Vaughn smiled back like he'd been starving for admiration. Within a week, they were meeting just to talk. Within 2 weeks, he was renting a small apartment on the edge of the city and calling it fate. He fed Nia the story that always worked. The cold wife, the lonely marriage, the misunderstood man. He never mentioned the prenup. He never mentioned that Amina's name opened doors he could never touch alone. He promised Nia a penthouse. He promised her the cafe. He promised her a life that sounded like music. "As soon as I handle things with my wife," he'd say, pulling her close. Nia believed him the way young women believe what they want to be true. She didn't know Vaughn wasn't handling anything. He was running out of time. The calls started hitting his office line. Someone tracked down his work number. Notices arrived, stamped final. Vaughn sat in his private study one afternoon, staring at his phone while his stomach turned to acid. Amount due, past due, immediate payment required. The number climbed until it stopped feeling real. $500,000 in debt, not counting what he'd lost the night before, in a desperate attempt to win it back. Vaughn could taste humiliation in the air, Amina discovering the calls, the mail, the lies. And if she divorced him, the prenup would leave him with nothing but his suits and his shame. No payout, no access to her accounts, no soft landing. He had always known that. He'd just assumed charm would soften the rules with time. But Amina was not careless. She was simply busy. 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner, Vaughn opened the home safe to look for a document he claimed he needed for taxes. Amina was at work. The penthouse was quiet. The safe's metal door swung open with a sigh, and Vaughn's eyes caught a folder that didn't belong to him. Amina's will. It was clean, drafted after her mother died, the kind of paperwork grief makes people finish. Vaughn read it standing there, heart pounding, as if someone might walk in and catch him stealing the shape of her life. The sole heir, in the event of her death, was him. Vaughn Rowe. Not a charity, not a cousin. Him. He closed the folder with careful hands, but the thought didn't close. It stayed open in his mind like a door you can't unsee. If Amina died, the prenup wouldn't matter. If Amina died, the collectors would stop calling. If Amina died, Nia's penthouse and cafe would become real instead of fantasy. If Amina died, Vaughn would stop being a decorative husband clinging to borrowed status. He would be the owner. The idea arrived cold, not as a scream, but as a whisper. A solution. A reset. A clean line drawn through his mistakes. That night, Vaughn made the reservation at National Harbor. Waterfront, candlelight. The kind of place where Amina relaxed, where she trusted the world to behave. He brought it up in the kitchen with a practiced smile. 8 o'clock, he said. Just us. Amina looked at him, and something in her gaze tightened, like she was hearing a sound he couldn't. Vaughn leaned in and kissed her cheek anyway. As he walked away, his second phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Can't wait. When's it happening? Vaughn stared at the words, then at the dark window where his reflection hovered like a stranger. He typed one sentence and hit send. Soon. Then he slid the phone back into his pocket and poured himself a drink, hands steady, face calm, as if he hadn't just stepped onto a road that only ended one way. Hours before the reservation, Vaughn had been in his private study with the curtains drawn, staring at his phone the way a man stares at a cliff edge. Notifications stacked across the screen like a countdown. Final reminder. Immediate payment required. Past due. Past patience. He kept the volume off, but he could still hear them in his head. Collectors, lenders, faceless men with cheerful voices and sharp teeth. He'd already blocked 3 numbers that morning. 2 more appeared by lunch. And then, as if the universe wanted to mock him, an email arrived from a boutique hotel in Arlington, confirming a weekend stay he hadn't booked on the household card. Nia's idea. Something private? She'd whispered, her fingers tracing his tie. Just us. Like a real couple. Vaughn had promised it, knowing he didn't have the cash to pay for it, knowing he was borrowing time the way other men borrowed money. He poured a drink at noon and told himself it was to steady his nerves. He finished it and poured another and realized the truth. He was trying to drown the sound of his own panic. In the corner of the study sat the safe, Amina's safe. Heavy steel, fingerprint lock, the kind of thing you buy when you've built something worth stealing. Vaughn remembered the day he'd opened it, the folder he'd found inside, the line that changed everything. Sole beneficiary, Vaughn Rowe. Not a cousin, not a foundation, not a church. Him. It had felt like fate handing him an exit door. But fate didn't hand out exits for free. You had to push. Vaughn looked at the time, then at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He practiced a smile soft, affectionate. Then he practiced worry brows pinched, eyes slightly damp. He chose the version that would work best for tonight. By the time Amina came home, he already had the mask on. He kissed her cheek in the kitchen like a man grateful for his wife. He told her the reservation was a surprise, that he'd missed her, that he wanted to celebrate them. Amina's eyes lingered on him, searching. Vaughn held his smile steady. When she turned away, he checked his second phone. Nia, I can't stop thinking about us. Vaughn typed back. Soon. Just trust me. He slid the phone into his pocket and felt his heart settle into a cold rhythm. Tonight, he told himself, the panic ends. The restaurant at National Harbor was the kind of place that made people speak softer without being told. Glass walls caught the river's darkness and turned it into something elegant. Inside, amber light slid over white linen and polished silver. Jazz drifted from somewhere unseen, slow and smooth, like it had been poured into the air. Amina Rowe stood at the entrance for a breath, taking it in. She had spent years in rooms like this, rooms where money pretended it was manners, where smiles had edges. Normally, she could glide through it all without feeling a thing. Tonight, she felt everything. Vaughn came up beside her and offered his arm. He looked the way he always looked in public: crisp suit, careful grooming, confidence that didn't quite belong to him but fit well enough that people assumed it did. "You look incredible," he said, warm enough to make it believable. Amina lifted her chin. "So do you." A part of her wanted to relax. It had been months since they'd had a night that wasn't interrupted by her work calls or his vague meetings. A part of her wanted to let this be what it looked like, two people trying again. But another part of her, the older part, the part that had kept her alive in boardrooms full of men who loved to underestimate her, stayed alert. The hostess greeted them with practiced sweetness. "Mr. and Mrs. Rowe, welcome back." Vaughn smiled as if he'd earned the greeting. Amina noted the detail. He'd made sure they were recognized. He wanted the room to witness them. They were led to a table near the window, where the Potomac lay flat and black, reflecting the boardwalk lights like thin gold needles. Amina sat, smoothing her skirt. Vaughn sat across from her, shoulders relaxed, fingers lightly touching the menu, as if he was deciding between two harmless choices. He wasn't looking at the menu, though. He was looking at her. "You've been running yourself into the ground," he said. Amina let out a small breath. "So have you." Vaughn gave a soft laugh. "Yeah, but tonight? I want us. Just us." The waiter approached, and Vaughn ordered a bottle of red with the certainty of a man who didn't pay for it. Amina watched him. For years, she had mistaken that certainty for stability. Tonight, it felt like something else. The wine arrived. The waiter poured. Vaughn lifted his glass. "To us," he said, eyes steady. "To finding our way back." Amina lifted her glass more slowly. The rim felt cool against her fingers. "To us," she echoed. They clinked. The sound was clean, sharp. A small bell. Amina took a sip. The wine was rich and smooth, familiar in the way expensive things often were. Nothing about it screamed danger. Her throat didn't burn. Her tongue didn't catch anything odd. Her mind tried to settle. "See," she told herself, "you're tired. You're suspicious because you're tired." Vaughn watched her swallow. Dinner moved forward in careful stages. Amina asked about his day. He offered answers polished to a shine. Calls, meetings, names, vague promises about something in the works. He asked about her newest facility in Bethesda, the staffing headaches, the investors who wanted quicker returns than real care allowed. He acted present. He acted loving. And still, Amina kept seeing that message on his second phone, bright on dark glass, gone in a blink but still carved into her. "Can't wait. When's it happening?" She tried to let conversation wash over it, tried to bury it under the taste of food and the hum of jazz. But her body wouldn't let her forget. Her shoulders stayed a little too tight. Her pulse stayed a little too loud. Back at the table, after the second course, Amina noticed Vaughn doing something he rarely did anymore, asking follow-up questions. Not the polite kind, the targeted kind. "So your attorney still reviews your corporate documents every quarter?" he asked, cutting his steak as if it were casual conversation. Amina lifted her eyes. "Kendra reviews the major ones," she said carefully. "Why?" Vaughn's smile stayed in place. "Just curious. You've got so many moving parts. I'm proud of you." Proud. Another word he used like a bandage, something meant to cover what was underneath. Amina took a sip of water, letting silence stretch until it became uncomfortable on purpose. Vaughn cleared his throat. "Do you still keep things separate?" he asked. Amina's pulse tapped once, hard. "Separate? You know," he said quickly, waving a hand. "Your business accounts, your personal accounts, all that. Sometimes I worry that if something happened to you, it would be chaos. If something happened to you." Amina felt the phrase settle into her stomach like a stone. She kept her face smooth. She kept her voice light. "That's exactly why everything is organized," she said. "So there's never chaos." Vaughn nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. They sharpened, like he was checking off a list. Amina watched him the way she watched a contractor trying to slip cheaper materials into a luxury build, with polite attention and a private refusal. The waiter arrived to clear plates. Vaughn asked for another pour of wine for Amina, a little too quickly, a little too eager. Amina watched the dark liquid slide into her glass. "I'm good," she said, placing her fingers over the rim. Vaughn froze for a heartbeat. "You barely touched it," he said, smile tightening. "Come on, It's our night." Amina let out a soft laugh. "And I want to remember it." She raised the glass anyway, but only to take a small sip. She watched Vaughn's eyes track the motion, the way a gambler watches a roulette wheel slow. It would have been almost pathetic if it wasn't terrifying. When Vaughn reached for his napkin, Amina noticed his hand was slightly damp. Not shaking, Vaughn didn't shake, but damp, like sweat, had found him even in the air-conditioned room. Amina's mind tried to give her an escape hatch. Maybe he's nervous about reconnecting. Maybe he planned a surprise. Maybe he's just stressed. But her body didn't accept those stories. The cold part of her, the part trained by long years of protecting vulnerable people, leaned forward and took control. When Vaughn asked her to step outside for fresh air after she mentioned feeling dizzy, Amina looked at him and thought, "He's steering me. He's guiding the scene. He's moving me the way he thinks he can move everything." And that was when Amina made a quiet decision. If she survived the night, she would never let him guide anything again. Halfway through the meal, Vaughn reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His touch was gentle. His fingers were warm. "I miss you," he said. Amina looked down at their hands. The gesture was familiar. The timing was not. "You're right here," she said softly. Vaughn's smile hesitated, then returned, "You know what I mean." Amina gave a small nod. She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't squeeze back either. She excused herself to the restroom. The hallway was dim, lined with framed photographs of the river in different seasons. Amina walked slowly, her heels clicking a steady rhythm that felt like counting. In the restroom mirror, she studied her face. Braids pinned neatly, lipstick perfect, eyes steady. The image said control. The feeling underneath said something else. What is he doing? She washed her hands with cold water and held them under the stream longer than necessary, letting the chill anchor her. She reminded herself of facts. She had no proof. She had no evidence. She had only a feeling. And yet, feelings like this had saved her before. When she returned to the table, Vaughn was sitting exactly as she'd left him. His posture was too composed, his expression too neutral. Amina's gaze dropped, almost against her will, to her wine glass. Same place, same level, same dark surface catching the light. But Vaughn's eyes flicked to the glass and away as if it was a spotlight. Amina sat down, smiled, asked him a question about a meeting he'd mentioned earlier. He answered smoothly. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. But he kept watching her glass. Amina lifted it and took another sip. Then another. She waited 10 seconds, 20, expecting her body to send some dramatic signal. Nothing happened right away. Vaughn's shoulders loosened slightly, like he'd been holding his breath. Amina's stomach sank. The check came. Vaughn paid with her card, as always, holding it like he belonged to it. The waiter offered a polite, "Have a wonderful night." Vaughn thanked him like a man receiving applause. Outside, the air was colder. The river smelled like wet stone. Amina's body felt fine as they walked to the garage, but her thoughts were wired. Vaughn opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in, buckling her seatbelt. The strap pressed across her chest like a boundary. Vaughn started the engine. The car rolled out into the night. At first, everything looked normal. Lights, signs, familiar streets. Vaughn's hand steady on the wheel, his face angled forward like a man driving his wife home after a romantic dinner. Then Amina's vision tilted. It began as dizziness, subtle, like she'd stood up too fast. Then a wave of heat, then cold. Her stomach tightened, and nausea rose hard and sudden. She swallowed. Her throat felt tight. "Amina?" Vaughn's voice was gentle. "You okay?" Amina fought to steady her voice. "I feel dizzy." "We'll get you checked out," Vaughn said quickly. "I'm taking you to the ER." Amina turned her head toward him. He wore concern like a perfectly pressed shirt, but his eyes were too bright. Amina's pulse spiked. She reached for her phone, but her fingers fumbled. Vaughn glanced down and placed his hand over her wrist, soft pressure, guiding. "Don't strain," he said. "Just breathe." Amina's stomach lurched again. They left the brighter roads. Streetlights thinned. Buildings fell away. Trees gathered closer. Amina stared at a sign as it flashed by and disappeared. Directions toward parkland, toward darkness, not toward any hospital. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "This isn't the hospital," she whispered. Vaughn didn't answer. He took an exit ramp. The car descended into a quieter world. The radio played low, a song too smooth for what her body was screaming. "Vaughn," Amina said, louder now. "Stop. Turn around." He kept driving. Amina tried to unbuckle her seatbelt. Her fingers felt slow, clumsy. She pulled at the latch, but it wouldn't click. Panic rose behind her eyes, hot and sharp. The road narrowed. Trees rose on both sides like walls. Vaughn turned onto a smaller road, then another, and finally onto gravel. The tires crunched loudly, the sound echoing into the woods like a warning. He drove deeper until the canopy thickened overhead. Then he stopped. The headlights went off. Darkness pressed against the windows. Amina turned toward him. In the dim, his profile looked unfamiliar, like she was sitting beside a stranger wearing her husband's face. "What are you doing?" she breathed. Vaughn turned, and his eyes caught faint light from the dash flat. Calm. "I'm ending this," he said. Amina's mouth went dry. "Ending what?" "The part where you own my life," Vaughn replied. Amina tried to speak, but nausea rolled through her again, stealing her breath. Vaughn's tone stayed even. "I put something in your drink," he said. "Enough to make you fail quietly." Amina stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for laughter, waiting for him to say she was paranoid, and he didn't. "You're lying," she whispered. Vaughn's smile was thin. "No." Amina's mind raced. "Phone." "Help? Stay awake? Keep air moving." "Why?" she choked out. Vaughn exhaled as if he'd been waiting to talk. "Because you trapped me," he said. "Because you made sure I'd get nothing if I left." "You signed the prenup," Amina rasped. "I signed it because you and your lawyer set it up that way," Vaughn snapped. The first crack of anger. "You built a cage and called it protection." Amina shook her head weakly. "That's not." "You don't even hear yourself," he cut in. "You talk about your empire like it's a monument, and I'm just the guy standing next to it so people can say you have a husband." His words hit her harder than the sickness. Not because they were true, but because he believed they justified what he'd done. Amina forced her voice steady. "So you murder me?" Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Don't use that word like you're the victim of some random man," he said. "You made me small." Amina's breath came shallow. "And Nia?" she whispered. "That's what this is?" Vaughn's eyes flickered. "She's young," he said. "She sees me. She doesn't control me." Amina felt betrayal slam into her chest, sharp, clean pain. "You're killing me for a girl." "I'm fixing my life," Vaughn said again, like a prayer. He reached across and unbuckled her seatbelt. The click was loud in the dark. Then he opened her door. Cold air rushed in, damp with leaves and earth. "Get out," Vaughn said. Amina stared at him. "No." Vaughn's hand closed around her arm, grip hard. He pulled. Her legs didn't cooperate. She stumbled out and dropped to her knees on the gravel. Stones bit through her stockings. The forest loomed around her, silent and watching. Amina gasped, trying to pull air into lungs that felt too tight. Vaughn stood over her. "You gave me everything," Amina rasped. "I loved you." His silence lasted too long. Then, softly, he said, "That was your mistake." Amina's eyes filled with tears. "Please, don't leave me." Vaughn looked at his watch. "You have a little time," he said. "Not much." He turned away, got back into the driver's seat, and shut the door. The engine started. "Amina," Vaughn said through the open window, voice calm. "Goodbye." The car rolled forward. Gravel crunched. Taillights moved through the trees like slow red eyes, then vanished. After Vaughn's taillights vanished, the woods did what woods always do. They kept their secrets. The air dampened around Amina. The ground soaked through her clothes. Somewhere, something small moved through leaves, and the sound made her flinch like it was a threat. She tried to sit up. Her arms shook. Her stomach clenched hard enough to fold her in half. She pressed her forehead to the gravel and breathed in short, stubborn pulls. "Don't close your eyes," she told herself. "Don't." Her mind began reaching for anchors, anything familiar. She pictured the lobby of her first facility. Sunlight through tall windows, the scent of fresh wood, an elderly resident laughing because the piano in the corner had been tuned perfectly. Amina had fought for that piano. She'd fought for the right kind of carpeting, the right kind of nurses, the right kind of food. She'd fought because dignity was always the first thing the world tried to take from black bodies when they got old or weak. Now, in the dirt beside a gravel road, she understood something with brutal clarity. Vaughn wasn't trying to take her money. He was trying to take her dignity, her existence, because he believed he deserved a life bought with her silence. Amina's throat tightened. She tried to swallow, but her mouth was dry. Her fingers went numb. Her legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. The night pressed in. The stars were hidden by branches. The air smelled like wet bark and cold metal. Her eyelids drooped again. No, she thought. Not like this. Then, when the engine sound appeared, it didn't feel like hope at first. It felt like hallucination. Her mind had started inventing rescue because it couldn't accept ending here. But the headlights were real. When Dom's face appeared above her, Amina felt a strange, bitter laugh rise in her chest. Of course it would be him. Of course her competitor would be the one to find her. To witness her at her lowest, to see what her husband had done. Humiliation flared, then vanished. Survival mattered more. At the clinic, Lorraine's first instruction was clear and cold. She does not exist on paper, she said to the staff. No database entry, no calls to her listed emergency contacts, not one. Dom didn't argue. He didn't ask permission. He moved like a man who understood that time was an enemy. Later, when Amina was stable enough to be moved, Dom brought her to his penthouse, and he didn't frame it as charity. This is tactical, he told her. Your home is compromised. Your phone, your building, your routines, he knows all of it. Here, he knows nothing. Amina had wanted to protest. Pride had tried to stand up in her throat. Then she remembered Vaughn's calm voice in the dark. Goodbye, and pride sat back down. That same night, Dom called his security consultant. A man who spoke in short sentences and never smiled. I want everything legal and clean, Dom said. Public records, financial patterns, relationships. No noise. The consultant's voice was flat. Understood. You want a full profile on Von Rowe? Yes, Dom replied, and I want it yesterday. While Dom built the net, Vaughn sat in his own living room with bourbon and confidence, scrolling through sympathy templates in his head like a man shopping for the right disguise. He typed Nia a message with trembling excitement, disguised as grief. Tragedy happened. She's gone. We can finally be together. Then he stared at the screen, waiting for the thrill to hit. It did. And in that quiet thrill, Vaughn never once considered the most dangerous possibility of all, that Amina Rowe was still breathing. Amina woke the way people wake from deep water, slow, confused, lungs searching for the surface. Her eyes opened to bright ceiling tiles and a single fluorescent light that hummed softly. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she tried to swallow and pain sliced through her throat, and memory returned like a hard slap. The gravel. The cold. Vaughn's voice saying goodbye. She jerked slightly, and the monitor beside her answered with faster beeps. Lorraine Waverly appeared at her bedside like she had been there the whole time. Breathe, she said, calm as a metronome. You're safe. You're in my clinic. Amina's lips moved. No sound came out. Lorraine held a cup with a straw to her mouth. Small sips, she instructed. Your body took a hit. Don't challenge it. Amina drank. The water tasted like survival. Dom stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Amina's face as if he was trying to memorize proof that she existed. He looked exhausted, shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, anger sitting under his skin like a second heartbeat. You found me, Amina rasped. Dom nodded once. I did. Why were you there? Dom's gaze flicked away, then back. I had a meeting, he said, voice controlled. An investor wanted a quiet drive and a quiet talk. He canceled. I drove anyway. Sometimes I drive when I can't think in a room. Amina stared at him. Fate, she realized, wasn't a kind thing. It was random. It saved you without asking whether you deserved saving. Lorraine spoke before Amina could. You need to understand something, she said. We did not log you officially. No insurance, no electronic trail. Nothing that can be subpoenaed by the wrong person because someone made a phone call. Amina's stomach tightened. So, no one knows? Only the people in this room, Lorraine said. And the nurse I trust with my life. That's it. Amina lay back, eyes burning. He's going to report me missing, she whispered. Dom's jaw clenched. Let him, he said. We want his story on record." Amina turned her head toward him, surprised by the coldness in his voice. Dom leaned forward slightly. "Amina," he said, low, "he left you to die. Whatever you feel about him, love, history, guilt, put it in a box and lock it. He's a threat now. Treat him like one." Amina's breath shook. For a second, grief rose, grief for the marriage she'd believed in, for the man she'd thought she knew, for the years she'd poured into keeping the peace. Then another feeling rose beneath it, darker and steadier. Steel. "I don't want him to see me again," she whispered. "He won't," Lorraine said. "Not until you decide." Dom's phone buzzed. He checked it, then exhaled. "He's already moving," he said. Amina's eyes sharpened. "How do you know?" Dom hesitated, then held up his screen. A news alert, a local tweet. Nothing official yet, but rumors were always faster than paperwork. "High-profile CEO's wife last seen at National Harbor," it read. "Husband devastated." Amina's stomach turned. "CEO?" She croaked. Lorraine's eyes stayed flat. "People call any man in a suit a CEO," she said. "Don't let titles scare you." Dom's voice tightened. "He's already framing himself," he said. "He's building the narrative while you're still fighting to breathe." Amina closed her eyes, forcing herself to stay calm. "He'll cry on camera," she whispered. "He'll hold my hand in public and look like a grieving husband." Dom's gaze hardened. "And he'll think the system will protect him," he said. Lorraine set the cup down and leaned in. "It will if you let him control the story," she said. "So you don't." Amina opened her eyes. "What do I do?" Lorraine's answer was immediate. "You live," she said. "You heal enough to think clearly, and you let people who know how to build cases do their jobs." Dom straightened. "I'm calling Renee Carver," he said. Amina frowned. "Why her?" "Because she hates predators," Dom replied. "And because she's careful, the kind of careful your husband won't anticipate." Lorraine nodded. "Renee is discreet," she said, "and she understands the difference between a messy accusation and a clean prosecution." Amina stared at the ceiling again. Her body still felt weak, but her mind was sharpening with each breath. "All these years," she whispered, "I thought being the strong one meant carrying everything quietly." Dom's voice softened a fraction. "Being strong," he said, "also means knowing when to let the right people carry some weight." Amina blinked back tears. "Okay," she said. The word came out rough, but it was real. Outside the clinic, Von Rowe stood in front of his building with a trembling mouth and a carefully broken voice, surrounded by a small knot of neighbors and curious onlookers. He spoke in fragments how they'd gone to dinner, how she'd felt unwell, how she stepped out, how he searched the waterfront like a man tearing his own heart open. People nodded. People offered hugs. People said they were praying. Vaughn accepted all of it like a man accepting an award. Later, alone in his study, he stared at the same safe he'd once feared, and he let himself smile. He whispered into the dark, "It's done," and the quiet answered him back, letting him believe it. Amina turned her head toward the window, where a thin slice of night showed between blinds. In that dark slice, she saw her own reflection faint, ghost-like, and it struck her with a strange calm. Vaughn wanted her to become an absence, a missing poster, a story that ended without her voice. She wouldn't give him that. She imagined Kendra, her friend, her attorney reading headlines and feeling that cold twist of suspicion. Amina's fingers curled against the sheet. She wanted to reach for the phone, to call Kendra, to hear a familiar voice say, "I'm here." But Lorraine's earlier warning echoed, no pings, no trails. So Amina did the hardest thing she'd ever done in her polished adult life. She waited. And in that waiting, she felt the old version of herself, the one that tried to make everyone comfortable, quietly step aside for a newer version, a woman who could sit in silence and let enemies hang themselves. Dom watched her decision settle, and something like respect softened his anger. He wasn't saving a victim. He realized he was backing a strategist who survived in real time tonight. That night, Renee Carver arrived without lights or sirens. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She flashed her badge for a second, then tucked it away like it was dangerous to show. "No official intake," she said immediately. "No paper trail. Not until we control the timeline." Amina sat up as far as she could. Renee placed a small recorder on the table. Tell me what happened, Renee said, voice flat with professionalism. Start from the invitation to dinner. Amina spoke. Renee asked questions that cut through emotion and pinned down facts, times, routes, words, gestures. Lorraine provided clinical documentation in precise phrases. Dom filled in gaps with what he'd seen when he found Amina. By the end, Renee clicked the recorder off and looked at Amina with a kind of cold respect. He thought you were an object, Renee said. Something he could move, discard, inherit. Amina's jaw tightened. He's going to learn what I am, she said. Renee nodded. Good, she replied. Now we gather motive and corroboration. Dom asked, restaurant footage? Yes, Renee said. If he did anything, cameras may have it. Amina's memory flashed to Vaughn's eyes on her glass. He watched it, she whispered. He watched me drink. Renee's lips pressed together. Then we get the footage, she said. We get his financial records, we get his messages, and we get his mistress. Amina flinched at the word. Renee's gaze stayed steady. Not to punish her, she added, to show motive. 2 days later, Renee met Patrice Bell at a small cafe in Silver Spring. Patrice arrived tense, scanning the room like trouble might walk in behind the barista. Renee didn't waste time. Your daughter isn't my target, she said quietly. But she's involved with Vaughn Rowe. Patrice's shoulders dropped with grim recognition. I knew it, she muttered. Married men always come with gifts and poison. Renee slid a photo across the table, Amina at a keynote, poised and powerful. This is his wife, Renee said. Someone tried to kill her. Patrice's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Renee watched her carefully. Your daughter's messages can help, she said. If she cooperates voluntarily, that matters. Patrice blinked hard, eyes filling with anger and shame. Nia didn't know, she said fiercely. She's foolish, not evil. I believe that, Renee replied. So help her do the right thing. Patrice nodded slowly, jaw set. I'll bring her, she said, and she'll tell the truth. The next day, Nia sat in Renee's office with trembling hands. She looked like someone who had just discovered the world wasn't gentle. Renee scrolled through the messages. Promises. Plans. A future that always started soon. The words were romantic on the surface and rotten underneath. Renee looked up. Did he ever mention a prenup? She asked. Nia shook her head, tears already falling. No. Did he ever mention that his wife owned everything? Renee continued. No, Nia whispered. He said they built it together. Renee nodded and kept scrolling. She stopped on one message and turned the screen slightly so Nia could see it. Soon I'll handle everything with my wife. Divorce won't fix it. Nia's face crumpled. I thought he meant lawyers, she sobbed. I swear. Renee's voice stayed flat. He meant violence, she said, and you're going to help prove it. Nia gave a formal statement. Patrice sat outside the office, hands clasped, praying without words. That evening, Renee received the restaurant footage. She watched it alone, lights off, screen glowing. She watched Amina stand and walk away. She watched Vaughn scan the room. She watched his hand move toward Amina's glass in a quick, practiced motion. Renee paused the frame on Vaughn's face, half-turned, eyes checking for witnesses. Found you, she whispered. Then came the finances. Vaughn's debts were worse than Amina had suspected. Multiple lenders, overdue notices, relentless withdrawals, transactions that screamed desperation. Renee laid the documents out. Motive tightened into a hard line. Debt, entitlement, and a wife's estate he believed he could claim. When Renee called Dom's penthouse, Amina answered on the clean phone, voice steady. We have enough, Renee said. Now we stop thinking like victims and start thinking like prosecutors. Amina's fingers tightened around the phone. What's the plan? Renee's tone stayed calm. We make him comfortable, she said. We let him believe you're dead. Then we lure him to a bank consultation about the estate. He will come because he's addicted to the idea of winning. Amina swallowed. Her knuckles went white. I want to see his face, she said quietly. You will, Renee promised, but you stay cold. You give him nothing but truth. Amina ended the call and sat very still in the guest suite, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Vaughn was living in his own story, the one where he was the grieving husband and the world handed him a fortune. Somewhere downtown, a conference room sat empty under fluorescent light, waiting for signatures and smiles. A banker would soon rehearse condolences. An investigator would rehearse handcuffs, and Amina would rehearse her face still, unreadable, so the first crack in Vaughn's composure could be heard clearly. A knock came at the door. Dom stepped in with tea. "You ready?" he asked. Amina looked up. Her eyes were dry now. Clear. "I'm alive," she said. That's what he didn't plan for. Dom nodded slowly. "Good," he said, "because tomorrow he gets his first reward." Amina's voice was quiet, almost gentle, and the day after that, she said, "He gets the truth." If you're still with me right now, stay close, because Vaughn Rowe is about to hear a phone call that makes him believe he's won. And he's going to walk straight into the room where Amina Rowe is waiting, breathing, and done being merciful. By the time the city woke up, Vaughn Rowe had already chosen what kind of widower he planned to be. He shaved closer than usual, as if grief required sharp edges. He wore charcoal instead of black, because black felt too loud for the first days too hungry. Charcoal said tasteful sorrow. He practiced the right amount of redness in the mirror, then stepped out of the penthouse with his shoulders slightly bowed, the posture of a man carrying a tragedy he didn't deserve. Inside the elevator, his face relaxed, not into joy exactly, but into relief. Across town, in a downtown penthouse Vaughn had never seen, Amina Rowe sat at a table with a legal pad and a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Lorraine Waverly moved around her like a careful clock, checking pulse, pupils, grip. Dom Waverly stood by the window, phone in hand, jaw tight. Renee Carver arrived without announcement and without drama. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She looked at Amina the way surgeons look at an incision. Steady, precise, focused on the fix. "I pulled the footage," Renee said, setting a folder down. "He's on camera." Amina's throat tightened. "Clear?" "Clear enough that a jury won't need imagination," Renee replied. "He scans the room, he moves fast, he hides it. The timing matches your bathroom break." Proof had a strange weight, heavier than suspicion, lighter than grief. Amina closed her eyes for one beat, then opened them again. Renee flipped to the next section. Financials are ugly. Multiple high-interest lenders, overdue notices, betting accounts. He's bleeding money and trying to bandage it with more risk. She tapped another page, and the messages to Nia Bell read like motive on a screen. Dom's voice stayed low. "Nia cooperated?" "Voluntary statement," Renee said. Her mother brought her in. The girl's shaken. She didn't know about the attempt, but she confirms the promises. Penthouse, cafe, soon. She also confirms he kept saying divorce would leave him with nothing. Nothing. That word again. Vaughn had been living under it for years, and instead of building his own life, he decided to steal hers. Lorraine rested a warm palm on Amina's shoulder. "Your body is still recovering," she murmured. "Don't let adrenaline fool you." Amina nodded once. "I'm not running on adrenaline," she said. "I'm running on clarity." Renee opened her notebook. "Here's the plan. 2 calls, 2 nudges. We don't chase him. We let him walk toward the cliff smiling." She wrote as she spoke, building the trap like a blueprint. "Call 1 comes from a patrol detective," Renee said. "They tell him a woman's body was found near Rock Creek. ID in the purse indicates Amina Rowe. They ask him to come in for official identification in 3 days. The delay matters. Certainty makes people sloppy." Dom gave a small nod. "He'll perform louder." "Exactly," Renee said. "He'll text. He'll call. He'll say something we can use." Amina's hands curled on the table. "He'll celebrate." Renee didn't soften. "Predators enjoy control. We're taking it." Call 2 comes from the bank condolences, estate consultation, conference room 7, 3 p.m. He'll come because he thinks the door is opening. Amina looked down at her hands. They weren't fully hers yet, still weak at the edges, but they were steady enough to sign, steady enough to point. "And I'm there," she said. "You're there," Renee confirmed. "But you don't speak until you can speak without shaking. We control your appearance like we control evidence." Doing it right meant cleaning every loose thread Vaughn might tug. It meant discipline, paperwork, timing, containment. That afternoon, Amina's attorney joined them through quiet channels. She didn't ask Amina to relive the night. She had the statement, Lorraine's report, the camera timestamp. She treated Amina like a client, not a spectacle. We file immediately, the attorney said. Divorce petition on grounds of attempted homicide, fraud, and adultery. Emergency financial order. We freeze what he can reach, which is very little. But we make it official. Amina exhaled. He uses my cards. Not after today, the attorney replied. We cut access fast. Amina signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. The signature looked sharper than usual, as if it carried anger. Then came the will. Amina stared at her own signature from a year ago and felt shame rise shame for trusting, for choosing peace, for believing marriage meant safety. Lorraine's voice softened. You wrote it after your mother died, Lorraine reminded her. You were thinking like a loving wife. That's humanity, not stupidity. Amina swallowed and slid the folder closer. Humanity almost killed me, she whispered. And it also saved you, Dom said, steady. Because you built a life worth saving, and someone stopped for you. It's ingestured made its acrosta. Amina didn't answer. She signed the revocation, initialed the new pages, and locked her estate into a structure no single person could ever hold in one hand again. When it was done, Renee tucked the paperwork away. Now we wait, she said. Waiting was torture for a woman who solved problems before they grew teeth. But this problem was a man who knew her habits and had decided to use them as a weapon. So Amina sat in Dom's guest suite and practiced being invisible. No calls, no emails, no familiar routines. Lorraine insisted on rest. Dom brought food and kept his distance, as if he understood that trauma needed space more than conversation. Renee moved like a shadow through her own system, securing footage, sealing copies, lining up warrants, ensuring every piece could survive a courtroom. On the third morning after the dinner, Vaughn received the first call. He was in the kitchen staring at Lily's someone had delivered white, expensive, theatrical. He liked the way they turned the apartment into a stage. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered with a voice already cracked. Hello? Mr. Rowe? The voice was male, official, dry. Detective Hart. I'm calling regarding your wife. Dr. Amina Rowe. Vaughn's heart snapped tight, then steadied when he heard the tone. Procedural. Not suspicious. Yes, Vaughn said, letting tremble in. Any news? Last night, a female decedent was located near the park boundary off a gravel access road, the detective said. Identification found with the body indicates it may be your wife. We need you to come in for official identification. It's our office. Relief flooded him so fast it almost made him dizzy. They found her. He forced grief into his voice. Oh God, he whispered. When? Friday at 11 a.m., the detective replied. You'll sign paperwork. We'll discuss next steps then. Yes, Vaughn said. Yes, of course. Thank you. He ended the call and stood very still, staring at the lilies. Then he laughed quietly, like a man alone with his secret. He texted Nia within seconds. It happened. They found her. I'm devastated. Soon we can be together. Nia replied with hearts and a question that sounded like innocence. Are you okay? Vaughn felt warmth spread through his chest. Not love. Victory. He typed back, just a little longer. He set the phone down and walked to the mirror, practicing the face he'd wear on Friday. Shock, but controlled. Sorrow, but dignified. He wanted people to pity him and admire him at the same time. He'd always wanted both. He spent the next hour sharpening the story the way a man sharpens a knife. He wrote a timeline on a yellow notepad. Dinner at 8, dizzy by 9. I drove toward the ER. Then the part where he needed luck to cover his cruelty. He practiced the line in 3 versions, confused, pleading, heroic, until he found the one that made him sound like the kind of husband strangers defended at work parties. He even stepped into the hallway outside the apartment and called out her name once, loud enough for the neighbor across the hall to hear, then lowered his voice and murmured, Please. Back inside, he cleaned. Not the kitchen, his digital life. He deleted the reservation email. He wiped the route history on his car app. He scrolled his second phone and hid Nia's thread inside a password folder, telling himself that wasn't guilt, it was strategy. He turned off location sharing. He changed passwords. Then, like a man who believed the world could be bargained with charm, he called one lender and promised a payment after the estate clears. The agent on the phone went quiet for a beat, greed meeting grief, and Vaughn heard himself sound convincing. He hung up and smiled at the silence. He poured a finger of bourbon, held it at the window, and toasted the dark river below. Then he texted Nia, soon, and felt his heartbeat settle again, finally steady. He was ready for Friday. He didn't know he was being studied like evidence. In Dom's penthouse, Renee tracked Vaughn's activity like weather. "He's escalating," she said, scrolling through logs. "He's reaching out, he's laying groundwork." "That's good." Amina sat upright, hands folded. "He's enjoying this," she said. Renee's voice stayed flat. "Predators enjoy control," she replied. "We're taking it." Dom watched Amina's face. "You don't have to listen to any of it," he said softly. "I need to know," Amina answered. "I need to understand him the way he tried to understand me." Renee nodded once. "Then, understand this," she said. "He thinks certainty is safety. We're going to hand him certainty and take everything else." The next morning, call 2 arrived like velvet. Vaughn was in his study when the bank called, the number displayed cleanly, professionally. "Mr. Rowe?" a woman's voice said. "This is Georgetown Private Wealth. We've been notified of Dr. Amina Rowe's passing. Please accept our deepest condolences." Vaughn pressed his fingertips together, hiding his smile. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "We hold documentation regarding Dr. Rowe's estate," she continued. "According to our records, you have standing as beneficiary. We'd like to schedule a preliminary consultation to review the process. Could you come in today at 3 p.m.? Today? Not Friday." Vaughn felt his pulse jump. The speed thrilled him. Money moved fast when you belonged to the right world. He was about to belong. "Yes," he said, "of course. I'll be there." "Conference room 7, she replied. "Third floor. We'll be expecting you." He ended the call and sat back, letting the chair cradle him. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment he believed he'd earned. He pictured debts evaporating, collectors vanishing, Nia's face when he handed her a key. He pictured himself as the man who made miracles. He opened his closet and chose his best suit, the one Amina had once bought him for a gala, because she said it made him look polished. He wore it now like an insult. In the mirror, he practiced grief again. He pinched the bridge of his nose until his eyes watered. He whispered her name once, like a prayer he didn't believe. "Amina?" Then he smoothed his tie and admired himself. Across town, Amina dressed for the bank as if she were dressing for a funeral and a war at the same time. A simple black dress. No jewelry except a thin watch. Hair pulled back, face clean, lips neutral. Lorraine checked her vitals one more time. "You're not standing for long," Lorraine warned. "If you feel weak, you sit. Don't let pride make you fall." Amina met her eyes. "Pride isn't driving me," she said. "Clarity is." Dom waited by the door, keys in hand. "Once we're in the room," he said quietly, "you follow Renee's lead. No improvising." Amina nodded. "I won't give him anything he can twist." Renee checked her watch. "It's time." They drove in silence. The city slid past like a film brick, glass, winter trees, river dark and slow. Amina's stomach tightened as they neared Georgetown. Not fear exactly. The anticipation of a long-held breath finally released. At the bank, security recognized Renee's credentials and stepped aside. Everything was staged to look normal. That was the point. No shouting, no chaos. Just a quiet room and a man walking into his consequences. Renee placed officers out of sight. Dom sat beside Amina at the long table. Amina folded her hands and stared at the door. She saw the gravel road again. The headlights going off. Vaughn's voice saying goodbye like it was nothing. Trust is sacred, she thought. He tried to turn it into a weapon. The clock moved toward 3. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway, confident, measured, a man arriving to collect his prize. Amina didn't blink. The handle turned very slowly. The door swung inward, and Von Rowe stepped into conference room 7 like a man walking into a blessing. He had his grief face on soft eyes, a careful slump to his shoulders, the kind of quiet that made people lower their voices. If anyone had been watching from the hallway, they would have seen a widower doing what widowers do, showing up, holding it together, being brave. Then his eyes landed on the far end of the table. Amina. Alive. Not a photograph. Not a memory. Amina Rowe sat upright in a simple black dress, hands folded, expression unreadable. The scarf at her throat looked like a small shield. Her gaze was steady and uninviting, like a locked door. For one long second, Vaughn's mind rejected it. His mouth opened, but the air didn't become words. He blinked hard, once, twice, as if that would fix the scene. Amina didn't blink back. You, Vaughn managed, voice thin. You're supposed to be… Don't, Amina said softly. One word. No anger, no pleading, just a final line drawn in the air. Vaughn took a half step backward, bumping into the door. His hand searched behind him for the handle, for escape, for the easy exit he'd promised himself. It wasn't there. Two uniformed officers slid into view, blocking the doorway without drama. Renee Carver stood near the window, badge in hand, calm as a judge reading a verdict. Vaughn Rowe, Renee said, voice even. You are under arrest for attempted murder and related charges. You have the right to remain silent. Vaughn's eyes flicked wildly from Renee to the officers to Amina, as if he could find a loophole in their faces. His throat bobbed. His skin went pale, the color of old paper. This is insane, he whispered. This is a misunderstanding. Amina, baby. Dom Waverly, seated beside Amina, didn't move. He simply watched Vaughn the way a doctor watches a patient who has lied about symptoms too long. Amina stood, slow and steady. The motion seemed to shrink the room around Vaughn. She slid a folder across the table toward him, white paper, black ink, clean corners. Divorce petition, she said. Emergency orders attached. You get nothing. Not the company, not the properties, not my accounts, not my name. Vaughn stared at the folder, then laughed once, high and broken. You can't do this, he said, more to himself than to her. Amina's eyes sharpened. You tried to end my life, she replied. I'm ending your access. The officers stepped closer. Vaughn lifted his hands instinctively, palms out, as if he could negotiate with air. I was desperate, he blurted. I had debts. I didn't know what I was doing. Renee's expression didn't change. We have the footage of you spiking her drink, she said. We have toxicology. We have your financial records. We have your messages. You knew exactly what you were doing. Vaughn's mouth kept moving, but the words began to collapse into noise. His eyes found Amina again, and something like panic turned into something uglier. I loved you, he said quickly, as if love could be retroactive. I love you. Amina tilted her head slightly. Her voice stayed quiet. You told me in the woods you never loved me, she said. You said I was convenient. Vaughn flinched. He hadn't expected that sentence to come back. He'd expected the woods to keep his secrets. Renee nodded toward the officers. Cuff him. Metal clicked. Vaughn's shoulders sagged as if the sound itself carried weight. He looked down at his wrists, and for the first time, his face lost its performance. What remained was small, raw, and afraid. As they guided him toward the door, Vaughn twisted his head back, trying to catch Amina's eyes one last time. Amina had already turned away. She stared out the window at the city like Vaughn was no longer an event, just weather that had passed. When the door shut, Amina's legs trembled, not from weakness, but from release. Dom's hand touched her shoulder steady, anchoring. It's over, he said softly. Amina let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since the headlights went off on that gravel road. No, she whispered. Now it finishes the right way. The weeks that followed were clean, slow justice. Vaughn hired an expensive defense attorney and tried to turn the story into fog. He suggested Amina had imagined it. He suggested an accident, but evidence is not persuaded by charm. Lorraine Waverly testified with clipped precision, documenting the poison and the timing. The restaurant footage played in open court, Vaughn's hand a quick flash over the glass. Financial records arrived in neat stacks, showing the debts, the bets, the panic. Renee laid out motive and method in plain language a jury could hold. Amina attended every hearing. She dressed simply, sat straight, and kept her face neutral. Inside, she kept meeting the ghost of who she had been, a wife who believed trust was enough. That ghost faded with each day Vaughn failed to deny what he'd done. Nia Bell testified too. She walked into the courtroom with shaking hands and told the truth about the promises, the penthouse talk, the cafe dream. She admitted she'd believed him. She admitted she'd felt chosen. Afterward, she found Amina in the hallway and stopped, trembling. "I'm so sorry," Nia whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." Amina looked at her for a long moment. Nia wasn't the enemy. Nia was proof of how easily hope can be used as bait. "I don't blame you," Amina said finally. "But let this be your last lesson paid for by someone else's pain." Nia nodded hard, tears falling. Patrice, her mother, stood behind her, one arm around her shoulders, eyes grateful and furious at the same time. On the final day, the judge read the verdict, and Vaughn's face emptied. Guilty. Attempted murder, sentenced to years that would outlast his lies. He turned once, searching for Amina, and found her sitting perfectly still, as if the sentence belonged to him alone. It did. For the first time in years, she felt her spine unclench, and the future stopped shrinking finally. Outside the courthouse, winter air cut clean through the last of Amina's fear. The sky was pale, the trees bare, the city moving on like it always did. Amina inhaled and felt something strange. Space. Dom waited by the car. He didn't offer celebration. He offered presence. "You did what you had to do," he said. Amina nodded. "I did what I should have done the first time I felt something was wrong," she replied. "I listened." In the months that followed, Amina rebuilt quietly. She tightened security. She revised every legal document. She returned to her facilities and saw her own strength reflected back at her in small ways. An orderly hallway, a nurse who smiled with relief, a resident who squeezed her hand and said, "We missed you, baby." Dom stayed in her orbit, not as a savior, but as a steady ally. Together, they launched a partnership that connected his urgent care clinics with her residences. Faster response, better prevention, more dignity. It was practical, and it felt right. One evening, Amina stood on her balcony and watched the lights ripple across the river. The night looked almost the same as it had before, but she was not. She had learned a lesson that arrives late and stays forever. Love without respect is alone, and some people spend their lives trying to live off what you've built. Amina lifted a glass of water clear, simple, and took a sip. No bitterness, no fear, just life. And if you made it to the end of this story, do 3 things for me. First, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next life story we're dropping in the coming days. Second, tap like if you believe survival is its own kind of victory. And third, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. Would you have confronted him the first time you felt something was off? Or would you have stayed quiet and built your case? Also, tell me what city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. On your screen right now are 2 more stories I think you'll enjoy. Click one, keep the night going, and I'll see you in the next one.